Everybody knows that shrunken people and giant things are ace, and it didn't take long for Doctor Who to get in on the act. 1964's Planet of Giants had pretty much the most basic narrative of any Doctor Who serial of its age, and it was marvellously effective because of it. Seriously, it's just brilliant. Even though it's generally easy to pick apart old set designs, if solely on the grounds that they don't match up to today's standards, I really can't put a foot wrong with anything I see in Planet of Giants. These props are the absolute best. I mean, look at that sink, look at that notepad, look at that ant, and so on and so forth. And the post-production transition between massive prop and real thing is remarkably seamless in a number of different scenes. So despite the fact that the last 2 episodes of Planet of Giants ended up getting squashed into one, and that the missing plot points resurfaced only in novels and audiobooks, I rank this story very high. There is also a stark absence of any kind of alien threat. Just 2 conspiring crooks and some overly harmful bug spray. I'd say that this self-contained serial is a little Hitchcock-esque, but with the added sci-fi twist that the goodies charged with putting a stop to the shenanigans are shrunken time travellers. Really, the whole thing is impossible not to love. It also addresses a subject that more recent Doctor Who has famously misfired, but more on that later. Before I dive into Planet of Giants, I'm probably going to spoil a thing or two that you might not want spoiled if you haven't already seen it. So if you'd like to watch it first, do so, but then come back and watch this video. The story begins with the Doctor informing his companions that they are approaching a planet. Keep in mind, folks, that this is a William Hartnell adventure, so naturally the TARDIS is doing all kinds of mad stuff. An alarm goes off on this numbered panel and the doors swing open. Just like that, they and the TARDIS are shrunk. It's something to do with pressure, I don't know. They're tiny and that's the end of it. Stop nagging him, Ian and Barbara. You're in a ship bigger on the inside, keep up. And their scanner explodes because, why not? They step outside and immediately discover what appears to be a giant worm, with what looks like the face of Bo next to it. Okay, that was a stupid thing to say. Ian and Susan also find these eggs and this ant, with Ian being the slowest on the uptake as usual. Yes, Ian, that giant seed packet with the word Norwich on it does mean that you're on planet Earth. They all do eventually realise what has transpired. They are now roughly the size of an inch, and their tiny little TARDIS has materialised in a small crack in this driveway. Look how Doctor, you nearly dropped that match on Barbara's head. And you're climbing into a matchbox, Ian. Is that sensible? And then along comes one of the biggest threats in this serial. A person. Mr. Farrow is by no means a bad man, and all he appears to want to do here is smoke a fag and stroke this cat. Oh boy. Before Micro Ian, yeah, let's just call him that, gets rumbled, this man with a lighter turns up, and suddenly these guys are talking some serious shop. DN6, science experiments, insecticide, a conflict of interest, a gun. Are you sure your gun didn't shrink as well, mate? Look at it. Having expressed a desire not to go through in promoting this dangerously potent DN6 stuff, that morally decent fellow is murdered by his colleague, which by my reckoning was unnecessary. He clearly stated his intent to take a boat on tour in the rivers of France, and now he can't because he's been killed, you swine. Any Attack on Titan fans in the house? Look at him there, that's flippin' terrifying. Don't stand in front of his mouth, Ian. After nearly being crushed by a dead bee, the Doctor deduces that everything here is deceased because of insecticide, which is a problem because bees and worms are vital to the growth of things. Yeah, he gave us that info 6 decades ago. After this giant cat showed up, I was immediately convinced that Doctor Who was over, despite having a clear memory of seeing other episodes of the show made after this one. Because I'm sorry, Shrunken Man versus Cat? Shrunken Man is going to lose every single time, and yet this vicious little Moggins walks off, so I figure it must be a faulty cat. When another person turns up, Ian and Barbara make the smart decision to hide in the most immovable of all inanimate objects. A briefcase. At which point we find out that the greedy crook man has now got a mate, and this is much more of an amicable matchup. A greedy sod and a mad scientist. They plan to hide the body of Mr. Farrow in the rivers of France, which is a bit below the belt, and make it look like an accident, whilst going ahead with the production of DN6. The bad news for our heroes is that they are taking the briefcase all the way to the lab with Ian and Barbara trapped inside of it. The good news is that the lab is literally right next to where they were. The Doctor and Susan find alternate means of entry by climbing up this drain pipe, and there's a lot more cool giant stuff in here. Test tubes, a big bowl of wheat, a book of litmus papers for when you want to indicate stuff, you might have a pool or something. Ian summarises that this bowl of wheat has been sprayed with DN6, and is fairly blasé about it given that Barbara just picked one of them up with her bare hands. In this story, opening a briefcase is an understandably tricky job. During their attempt to create a ladder out of paper clips to try and escape, Barbara gets confronted by this fly, and more credit to the prop team, the animatronics on that fly are superb. Even that opening latch looks cool. Meanwhile, the Doctor and Susan reach the summit of Mount Sink in a lab. They really should be careful not to fall back down. Move away from the edge. With this fly instantly dead on top of this wheat, it's clear that this DN6 stuff is a serious problem, but bigger danger comes their way. These two crooks want to wash their hands. The TARDIS crew retreat to their respective hiding places, with the Doctor and Susan climbing back down the sink. Let me remind you at this point that the Doctor and his companions have hit many a cliffhanger during their adventures, but none more perilous than this, the one where a man pulls a plug out of a plug hole. You don't say. Well, thank heavens for pipes that have other pipes coming out of them. After this near miss, the Doctor and his companions take it upon themselves to stop the production of this cursed insecticide, which won't just wipe out locusts, but anything it touches. Using the information written on this notepad, they can do the appropriate level of research. At the same time, Barbara starts to feel the effects of the DN6. Don't touch your face. As for these two, it's no wonder that they only featured in one serial. Pair of idiots. You know what this guy's plan is? It's to phone up the murder victims department and impersonate Mr. Farrow over the phone. Just to let you guys know, if you ever want to impersonate somebody else over the phone, just put a bit of cloth over the mouthpiece. That'll do it. I'm pretty sure that John Culshaw does that for his Big Finish recordings. Anyway, the operator's immediate response is, and brace yourselves, it doesn't sound like Mr. Farrow. At all. Well, I'm shocked. He even mentioned the rivers of France. It was so authentic. When he tries the trick a second time around, he somehow manages to confuse himself, which then draws attention to the police. Criminal mastermind is not the correct description. The tiny TARDIS crew also try and contact the authorities by climbing on top of this phone and doing the old use two corks to lift up a receiver trick. The excellent editing skills makes the concept actually really plausible, though I'm not sure what they were hoping to achieve by all talking slowly down the receiver at once. I swear that nobody knows how to use telephones properly in this serial. Anyway, that didn't work, so let's start a fire. In the Doctor's exact words, there's nothing like a good fire, is there? To hell with all that research, just blow things up. Good old Doctor. Look at the cheeky smile on his face there. There's no money in the world. But serious, this is just about the most dangerous plan that they could have come up with. Whilst the Doctor performs the arduous task of standing there and shouting orders, Ian and Susan run back and forth to the point of exhaustion until they spark this giant match. The gas tap ignites and the highly flammable DN6 canister goes boom. Or should I say, pop. This crook gets it in the face, and the baddies get arrested. Then the Doctor unshrinks everyone. Hooray! Barbara's okay as well, presumably because the DN6 didn't grow big with her. With the monitor sort of fixed, the serial ends with the Doctor saying, "Perhaps I shall know where we are." Yeah, it's the Daleks, mate. You know, the big one. The really big one. This was just a bit of filler, so I hope you enjoyed yourselves. So, there were two things which were clever about this story. One is the fact that the arrested crooks never even had the slightest idea that four tiny heroes were cooking up trouble for them. I love that. The second is that I consider this episode to have an ecological message done right. The most recent time that we saw the Doctor warn us of the dangers of harming the environment was in the episode Orphan 55, and it's easy to criticise that episode. It's really easy. And you know, maybe it should have looked back and learned from this serial that was televised 56 years prior. Planet of Giants writer Lewis Marks apparently took inspiration from Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, a book which warned of the dangers of pesticides way back in 1962, and for all of its B-movie madness, Planet of Giants addressed one specific problem and took doing the right things into its own hands, by stopping the production of just one harmful substance. You gotta begin somewhere, right? And I'm not suggesting that blowing cans up is the way to go about it, only that Planet of Giants was able to convey an important message message consistently and thoughtfully across a fully entertaining adventure. A perfect balance, I'd say, and much more effective than cutting a G.I. Joe style promo at the end of an episode. So perhaps next time, guys, look to your own past. With every conceivable pun intended, it starts with the small things. As of now, I'm going to start digging into all the serials that you guys have suggested. So keep those suggestions coming in the comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe. Have a good one.